In the town of Silver Vale, the wind carried more than dust. It carried judgment. That evening, as the sun sank behind the dry hills and bathed the cracked earth in orange light, Delilah Crane stepped out of her small general store. Her hands were rough from years of labor and her apron still smelled faintly of tobacco and sage. She paused, sensing it before she saw it. The silence. Not the good kind, the kind before a storm. Down Main Street, every pair of boots had stopped moving, men froze outside the saloon, a poker game abandoned mid-hand. Mothers held their children close, and at the center of it all stood a man, not a local, dressed in worn leather and shadow, facing off with Sheriff Beaumont. "Name," the sheriff barked, hand resting near his holster. The man didn't speak. He didn't even blink. "Don't play dumb, stranger. You ain't got papers. You sure as hell don't belong here." Eleanor moved closer. The stranger wasn't tall, but there was weight in his stillness, the kind of quiet that unsettles loud men. His face was partly hidden under a wide-brimmed hat, jaw unshaven, eyes unreadable. He looked like a ghost that had forgotten how to disappear. The sheriff stepped forward. "Last warning," and that's when she did it. Eleanor's voice cut through the tension like a whip. "He's with me." Everyone turned. Sheriff Beaumont blinked. "Excuse me?" "He came in this morning, bought supplies, didn't say much, but didn't cause trouble either." She held her ground, even as her stomach churned. "You want to fight, Sheriff? Take it elsewhere. We've had enough blood on this street." There was a pause, a long, cold one. Then Carver spat at the ground, turned and walked away with a glare that promised consequences. The crowd dispersed slowly. No one looked Eleanor in the eye. No one said thank you. The stranger stayed a moment longer, then tipped his hat barely, and disappeared into the dusk without a word. That night, Eleanor locked up early. She sat in the back of her shop, hands shaking slightly as she poured herself a measure of whiskey. She didn't know why she had spoken. Maybe it was the way the sheriff's voice reminded her of her late husband, barking, always ready to punish. Maybe it was the man's silence, heavy like grief. Or maybe she was just tired of fear. Later, as she closed the shutters, she saw hoofprints in the dust leading out of town. Just one set, and something in her heart tightened, not with regret but with an odd, inexplicable ache. What she didn't know was that a storm was already gathering, and by morning Silver Vale would never be the same. By morning the sun rose over Silver Vale like it always did, soft, golden, and indifferent. But something had shifted. It wasn't in the sky or the wind. It was in the way people walked, in the way they looked at Delilah Crane. The first sign came when old Miss Talbot crossed the street rather than pass in front of Elena's shop. Then came the silence, too quiet inside the store. No familiar greetings, no morning gossip. The bell above the door didn't ring once. By noon, even the regulars had stopped coming. Elena stood behind the counter, polishing the same tin cup for the third time, watching dust dance in the sunlight. Her shoulders ached. Her pride did too. "Guess I'm dangerous now," she muttered. Behind her the shelves were still stocked, from the last delivery, but with no customers. It might as well have been an empty room. She finally stepped outside, needing air that didn't feel so heavy. That's when she noticed the hand-painted sign nailed to the post across the street. "Trader's Pet." 3 crude letters, smudged at the bottom. C.S. Carver's. Her hands curled into fists. She ripped it down, heart thudding. Silver Vale was no stranger to cruelty, but it never usually wore its face so boldly. "Don't you know what kind of man that was?" A voice called from across the street. "Mr. Doolin, the butcher." Arms crossed. "You brought danger to our doorstep. I defended a man who hadn't done anything wrong. You don't know that." His face twisted. "But you'll find out." The door slammed behind him. Elena stood alone on the porch, wind tugging her skirt. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Somewhere deep inside she felt the flicker of something old. Shame, perhaps, or fury. That night she kept a lantern burning. She listened to the creaks of the wooden floor, to every breath of wind that nudged her shutter. She waited for someone to throw a rock, break her windows, or worse, but nothing came. Instead, the quiet stretched long into the early hours, until just before dawn she heard them. Hoofbeats, dozens of them, slow, steady, echoing down the canyon trail like a funeral march. Elena rose from her cot and pulled aside the curtain, and there, through the swirling morning mist, came a line of riders, dark silhouettes on black horses, silent as ghosts. Their leader rode front and center, face obscured by a shadowy hat. But she knew it was him, the silent man she'd defended. They didn't stop at the town's edge. They kept riding right into the heart of Silver Vale. No words, no banners, no weapons drawn. Just silence, heavy and undeniable. And for the first time in a long while, Elena's fear shifted, not away from danger, but towards something far more dangerous. Meaning, they came like a tide of black leather and silence. 24 riders, maybe more, their coats dusted with the road and their eyes hidden behind shadow and dust. They didn't gallop, they didn't shout, they moved as one, slow and deliberate, like wolves, stepping into unfamiliar territory, but not afraid. Windows slammed shut, doors locked, mothers pulled children inside by the arm. Silver Vale wasn't used to visitors, especially not the kind that rode in without asking. Elena stood at the edge of her porch, arms crossed, to hide how tightly she was holding herself. She hadn't expected this. A simple defense, a single moment of decency, and now this, a parade of vengeance. No, that wasn't what it felt like. They spread through the town with eerie coordination. 2 went to the saloon, 3 posted up outside the sheriff's office. 1 tied his horse to the post in front of the church, and just sat on the steps. Another entered the barber's and sat quietly in the chair, waiting, and then came him. Ash. She hadn't heard his name before, not from his lips or anyone else's, but she'd heard it now in whispers. Silas Gray. They said he was a ghost from the Badlands, a man who spoke with bullets instead of words, that his silence had weight, that he'd once stared down a judge and walked out of a noose. Elena believed every word. He rode up to her porch and stopped, not climbing down, not removing his hat, just looking at her through the shadows of early morning. Elena swallowed hard. You didn't have to come. Still nothing. She took a step closer. What is this? A pause. Then in a voice low and gravelly, he said the first words she'd ever heard from him. We protect our own. He turned his horse and rode on, heading toward the heart of town. Those 4 words echoed through her ribs like thunder in a canyon. We protect our own. But she wasn't one of them, was she? By midday, the town was a different place. Sheriff Beaumont had not shown his face. Word was he'd locked himself in the jailhouse and was waiting for reinforcements. No one dared knock. The saloon served drinks for the first time without shouting. The streets were swept clean without being asked. And every shop except Elena's remained shut. The riders didn't harm anyone. They didn't even speak unless spoken to. They were just there. A quiet pressure sitting on the town's chest. People called it a takeover. Elena wasn't so sure. It felt more like a message. Late in the afternoon, a small bundle appeared at her door. Inside, fresh bread, 2 tins of meat, and a note written in a rough but careful hand. For the woman, who speaks when it matters. No name, no signature, just silence again, speaking louder than words. By the second day, Silver Vale belonged to the silent ones. The townsfolk whispered more than they spoke, and when they did speak, it was behind closed doors, behind curtains, behind fear. The riders had not harmed a soul, but their very presence bent the rules of the place. Unwritten rules of power, of fear, of who was allowed to matter. Elena watched it all unfold from her porch. Her shop, for the first time in weeks, had customer. Again, a few brave souls crept in early that morning, their eyes darting from shelf to window, eager to grab what they needed, and leave without being noticed. But she noticed how Mr. Doolin, who'd mocked her just days before, could meet her eyes now, how the townspeople refused to speak the outlaw's name, as if doing so might summon something worse. They didn't understand what had changed, but they feared it. By midday, the gossip turned to paranoia. They're planning something, whispered the pastor's wife. They're going to kill the sheriff. No, they're here for the bank. They're just waiting. But Elena knew better. They weren't here for vengeance or money. They were here for him, and somehow for her. That afternoon, as the sun hung low and heavy, a single knock echoed on the door of the jailhouse. No answer. Another knock. Still silence. Then Ash stepped forward. Elena wasn't there to see it, only to hear about it later, about how he stood alone, hands visible, no weapon drawn, and asked to speak with the sheriff, quietly, calmly. When the sheriff refused, one of the riders picked up a small oil lamp and smashed it at the base of the door, not to burn the place, just to make a sound that echoed through town like a warning. Minutes later, Sheriff Beaumont slipped out the back and fled into the hills. Cowardice travels fast in a small town. By evening, there were no more whispers, only silence. Ash returned to the outskirts, and sat beneath the awning of the old trading post. His men melted into the shadows like smoke. Elena brought him water. He didn't speak when she approached, didn't even look up. She placed the tin cup beside him, and lingered a moment longer than she meant to. You didn't have to scare them, she said quietly. Still no answer. You didn't have to stay. That made him lift his head. I owe a debt, he said simply. To me. He looked at her, not through her, not around her, but at her, to someone I lost, he murmured, and to the one who reminded me what courage looks like. It wasn't a confession, but it was something. Elena sat beside him, two figures in the quiet of a town too proud to ask for help and too small to hide its shame, and for the first time she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this stranger's silence wasn't empty. Maybe it was sacred. The days that followed blurred together like dust trails in the wind, quiet, tense and uncertain. The riders kept to themselves, camping on the outskirts, drifting into town in pairs to buy supplies or sit silently at the saloon. No crimes, no demands, just presence. But Elena felt the weight of something else settling over her chest. Each time Ash passed by her store, 1,000 questions burned on her tongue, and she swallowed everyone. He had defended her. No, he had avenged her shame, but not once had he explained why, until the night he returned. The knock came after sundown, soft and slow. Elena opened the door to find Ash standing there, hat in hand. He looked smaller somehow, not weaker, but more human. I need to show you something, he said. She didn't ask where they were going. She simply followed. They walked beyond the edge of town, past the dry riverbed, toward the old missionary, ruins where weeds now grew taller than headstones. Moonlight spilled over broken stone crosses and half-buried memories. Ash stopped at a crumbled wall, pulled a small tin box from his coat, and handed it to her. Inside, a letter folded and worn with time, and a silver pin, dull and bent, shaped like an eagle mid-flight. Elena unfolded the letter slowly. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was her brother's, Isaac Crane. Her voice caught in her throat. Where did you get this? Ash looked away. He gave it to me before he died. Her hands trembled. That's not possible. He vanished 5 years ago on a cattle drive to Silver Ridge. No one ever. He didn't vanish, Ash interrupted, his voice low, pained. He was ambushed. Cattle rustlers posing as lawmen. I was riding with him that night. He took the bullet meant for me. Elena staggered back, her fingers tightening around the letter. I buried him myself, Ash continued. Swore I'd carry word to his family, but I couldn't face it. Couldn't face you. The silence that followed felt heavier than any storm. You waited 5 years to tell me, she asked, voice cracking. I was a coward. She looked up sharply, expecting defensiveness, but found only shame in his eyes. I've done terrible things, Elena. I've ridden with men who believe silence is strength. But your brother, he was different. He talked about you like you were a lighthouse. Said you were brave even when the world wasn't watching. Tears blurred her vision. Ash stepped closer, pulling something else from his pocket. A small wooden ring carved and smoothed by hand. He made it for you, he said. Said you used to braid grass into rings as kids. Thought this one might last longer. Elena cupped it in her palm like it was glass. She wanted to scream, to hit him, to curse the years lost, but instead she whispered, thank you. Ash bowed his head, and for a long time neither spoke, just the wind between them and the grave. Beneath their feet, that night Elena couldn't sleep. She sat on the wooden floor of her shop, the letter spread across her lap, the carved ring resting gently in her hand. A single oil lamp flickered nearby, casting long trembling shadows on the walls. Her brother was truly gone, and yet for the first time since his disappearance, she didn't feel alone. Ash had told the truth. She felt it in his voice, in the way his eyes never flinched even when soaked in guilt. And somehow, in the middle of all that pain, he had carried her memory across years and deserts. At dawn, she lit the stove, made coffee strong enough to hurt, and step outside. That's when she saw the smoke, not from her chimney, from her barn. She ran barefoot across the dry grass as flames licked through the old wooden walls. The small barn she'd used to store winter feed and dried goods was already half engulfed. The fire danced with cruel elegance, red against the morning sky. She grabbed a bucket and ran for the well. Too late. By the time she turned back, the roof caved in with a groan. She dropped the bucket behind her bootsteps. Ash, he didn't ask what happened. He just stood beside her, staring at the smoldering remains. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched. Someone had sent a message, one the whole town could read. You're no longer welcome among the safe and silent. Elena breathed shallowly, smoke stinging her eyes. I should have expected it. Ash said nothing. They hate me for choosing a side. Still nothing. She turned to him. Say something, damn it. He looked at her, really looked. And for the first time since they met, there was something more than silence in his expression. Grief. I've seen men burn churches and graves, he said. But the worst flames are the ones you light in your neighbor's eyes. Then, without a word, he unbuckled his saddlebag, pulled out a wool blanket and covered her shoulders. It smelled of horses and rain. It felt like protection. They sat beside the ashes until the sun was high. Neither moved, neither needed to. And then out of nowhere she asked, what was he like that night? Ash didn't ask who she meant. He closed his eyes. Brave. He knew they were coming, but stayed to draw them off. Told me to ride while he held them back. He laughed when I protested. Laughed, said he wouldn't let me ruin your life by dying stupid. Elena smiled, a tear breaking free. Sounds like him. Ash reached into his coat and handed her a small flask. She took a sip. Whiskey, harsh and honest. And in that moment, something shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. A crack in the armor, a hand held in the dark. For the first time in years, Elena felt seen, not as the widow who ran the store, not as the woman who dared to speak, but as someone worth protecting, and maybe even worth staying for. The smoke had barely cleared when the rumors began to spread. A telegraph had been sent. Sheriff Beaumont, humiliated and exiled from his own town, had called in favors from men higher up, territorial marshals, bounty hunters and worse. He wanted the riders gone, all of them, by force if necessary. By the third morning, strangers began to appear on the edge of town. Not like Ash and his men. These wore badges, but not the kind pinned with honor. These were guns for hire. Men paid to make problems vanish, not negotiate. Whistler's Hollow tensed like a coiled snake. Elena stood inside her shop, watching the dust rise in the distance. She didn't need to count the riders. She could tell by the way they moved. Predators, not peacekeepers. When she turned, Ash was already there. He didn't speak, just stood, in her doorway, like a storm cloud. They're here for you, she said. No, he replied. They're here for what I remind them of. And what's that? That the law doesn't always mean justice. Silence hung thick between them. She stepped closer. You don't have to leave. Ash shook his head. If I stay, people will die. And I've buried enough guilt to last 2 lifetimes. You didn't burn my barn. No, but I brought the wind that fed the fire. He turned to go, but she grabbed his arm. Her voice cracked. You said you owed a debt. I paid it, he said softly, with the truth. Then why does it feel like you're still running? That stopped him cold. He turned back, to her, and for the first time there was something like pain in his eyes. Not the sharp sting of loss, but the deeper ache of hope denied. I don't know how to stay, he whispered. Elena's hand fell to her side. Ash nodded once and walked out the door. That evening, the riders gathered just outside town. Elena stood at a distance, watching as Ash spoke quietly to each man. They nodded, one by one mounting their horses in silence. She could feel it, the end, or maybe the beginning of another exile. Ash approached her once more before he left. No promises, no final words, just a look. She reached out and slipped something into his hand. The wooden ring. You carried his memory, she said. Now carry mine. He closed his fist around it, jaw tight, eyes dark, and then he rode. No farewell, no hero's send-off, just dust in the wind, and a woman on a porch, learning that grief has many faces, and some of them ride away when you need them most. The following day broke with no bird song, only hoofbeats and the cold ring of iron against iron. The marshals had arrived in full, 8 riders, all in uniform, all armed to the teeth, led by a man with silver hair and a scar across his lip that twisted when he smiled. Marshal Cyrus Hale. He dismounted slowly in the center of Silver Vale, spitting dust from his teeth. Where's the outlaw? He asked. No one in particular. No one answered. Not because they didn't know, but because they all felt the same thing gnawing at their guts. This wasn't about justice. It was about pride, power, revenge. Elena stood behind her shop window, watching the tension rise like heat off the earth. The townsfolk had gathered, quiet, nervous, hungry for someone else to make a decision. And then, from the ridge beyond the northern canyon, Ash and his men appeared. They didn't charge. They didn't posture. They came like ghosts, slow and steady, cutting through the dust like a knife. Ash wrote at the front face, unreadable, shoulders heavy with resolve. Sloane laughed when he saw them. Finally he stepped forward. Silas Gray, You're wanted for banditry, obstruction and harboring fugitives. Ash dismounted. I'm not here to fight, he said. I came to leave. You'll leave in chains. And that's when Elena stepped between them. She moved fast, too fast for fear to stop her, and planted herself between Ash and the marshals. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sloane tilted his head. Miss Marsh, step aside. No, this man is a criminal. This man buried my brother. He carried his death in silence for 5 years. He protected this town when your sheriff abandoned it, and he kept peace when he could have taken blood. Sloane sneered. He's still an outlaw. Elena's voice rose. Then so am I. Silence. The marshals shifted uneasily. Sloane's eyes flicked to the crowd, and saw the hesitation there, the flickers of doubt, fear, loyalty, and then something unexpected happened. One of the townsmen stepped forward, then another, and another. Not riders, not gunslingers, just farmers, blacksmiths and mothers standing behind Elena. They weren't armed. They didn't need to be. The stand was enough. Sloane's lip curled. You'd protect a killer. Elena shook her head. I'm protecting what this town forgot. Honor. And if you take him, you take me too. A long pause. Ash said nothing, but his eyes locked with hers. And in that moment, everything that had been left unsaid became real. Finally Sloane barked a curse, turned, and waved his men off. Not worth it, he muttered. Let the dust bury you both. They rode out, one by one. Ash remained still as stone. When it was over, Elena turned to him, eyes brimming. I wasn't going to let you disappear again. Ash touched the ring tied around his neck on a leather string. You didn't. The marshals rode out with thunder behind them, but the air that followed was quiet. Not the same quiet from before, heavy with judgment and fear. This one was softer, lighter, like the first breath after a storm. Ash stood there a long time. After they'd gone, he didn't speak. He didn't move. Elena didn't ask him to. She simply walked beside him and took his hand, not to pull him forward, not to hold him back, but to let him know he wasn't alone anymore. The town returned, slowly to its rhythm. Some doors reopened, some remained shut. Whistler's Hollow didn't heal overnight, but it stopped festering. And Elena, she rebuilt. The barn had burned to the ground, but the foundation was strong. Ash offered his men to help, but she refused. You ride, she told them. I stay. Still, Ash didn't ride far. He and a few others set up camp, a mile outside town, beyond the old pine grove. He came to her store sometimes, early before the others were awake. Always quiet, always helpful. He never stayed long, but he always returned. One day, as the sun set behind the rebuilt barn, Ash appeared with a burlap sack over his shoulder. Brought you something, he said. He untied the sack and pulled out a sapling, a young apple tree, roots wrapped in damp burlap. Elena blinked. What's this? For the soil you saved, he said. For what might grow here. She knelt beside him as he dug the hole, and together they planted it, quietly, reverently. It was crooked, and thin and not much to look. Don't even it was alive. That night they sat on her porch, watching the moon rise. Ash held the wooden ring in his fingers, twisting it gently. I never planned to come back, he said. I never planned to care again, she replied. Neither of them laughed, but when their hands touched, something braver than laughter passed between them. Ash turned to her. Do you ever wonder why people like us don't belong anywhere? Elena shook her head. No, I think we're meant to build the places we belong to. He was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded and stayed. Spring arrived like a secret whispered into the dirt. The wind was softer now, the earth warmer. Wildflowers crept across the hillsides like shy guests invited back after too long away. And in the center of Silver Vale, just beyond the old barn, the apple tree bloomed. Its crooked branches wore pale pink blossoms like medals, testaments to what had endured. The townsfolk still watched Elena with mixed eyes. Some nodded, some avoided her, but most had learned not to speak her name with pity. They spoke it with respect. Ash never moved into her home. He came and went with the weather, always returning before the seasons turned. He still carried silence like a second skin, but it no longer hit him. With Elena, he didn't need words to be known. He built a new corral behind the barn, fixed the roof of the church one morning, unasked, helped an old man shoe his mule and left before anyone could say thank you. He didn't ask for belonging, but it found him anyway. One afternoon, months after the storm had passed, a boy from town wandered to Elena's store holding a folded newspaper. Miss Marsh, is it true, he asked, that Mr. Wolf used to be wanted in 3 territories? She smiled, took the paper from his hand and folded it again. neatly, without judgment. Sometimes people are wanted, she said, before they're truly seen. And when the wind rose that evening rustling through the blooming apple tree, Elena stood beneath it and looked toward the ridge. She didn't have to wait long. Ash was already riding in, hat low, back straight, quiet as always, but something was different now. He wasn't coming as a fugitive, he was returning home. Sometimes the people the world fears most are the ones who carry its deepest truths. Sometimes silence isn't emptiness, it's depth. And sometimes love doesn't arrive with fanfare or vows. It rides in quietly, plants its roots, and waits patiently to bloom. If this story touched you, leave a comment below. Tell us, have you ever met someone who changed your life without saying a word? Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of quiet strength, unexpected love, and the kind of redemption that only the wild frontier can offer.